So I've been talking for about 15 minutes here, and it's a good time for me to stop share. I'm going to kind of turn the microphone over to Melody and Greg, some agents who have already moved their folks in their county, and let them tell you a little bit about some of the tricks of the trade and some of the things that they've learned. And I'm going to listen to some of the things in the chat box and get ready to begin to answer some questions. So take it away.
Okay, I'll be brief, and because Natalie's covered quite a bit of what we do, but just to give you some background of how Greene County approached it. I guess in January, I went into Super. Well, at our monthly meeting and in talking with the master gardeners, we got all the emails corrected in Super and made sure that they were all marked and all that good stuff, because it starts on the agent's end. So if the agent don't have everything in Super that they need to, then it's not going to work for you as master gardener. So that's what we did in January. And then the month of February, master gardeners were doing just what Natalie went through and showed you what to do, the registration process, utilizing that email. We had a couple of glitches with that, but we got those worked out with IT. It was just because it was a typo in Super or something like that with the email. But they spent the month of February just registering to get into the new database. I had told them to just hold off on entering anything in the new system, not to put anything in the old system. I gave them sheets to be able to record hours for the first couple of months, because March 5th and 6th, I held a database training, 3 hours each. Made every one of my members come in and sit through that training. And we just did one last night as a makeup. So all of mine are in. They have all had hands-on experience. We all went through and entered hours together. Everybody brought computers or their phones or their iPads or whatever they were utilizing to enter hours. And we've actually had no trouble since just initially trying to get everybody in. So the cool thing again is that if you lose password, you just go in and reset that yourself. You always have access as a master gardener to be able to get into the system without having to rely on the agents, and agents aren't going to have to worry about trying to keep up with those passwords. My group loves it. They think the interface is fantastic. The things that Natalie was talking about, being able to see the hours, it makes them more accountable. They chit chat about, I mean, we got the plant sale and educational demos that are coming up in a couple of weeks, and they're seeing all the work that's been involved with planning for that, and that's kind of cool for them to be able to see that. So they're enjoying it, but it all starts with just the agent making sure that everything's right in Super. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And that for Greene County was where the issue was at.
I'm going to follow Melody up so everybody hears that. The emails have to be correct in Super. And we did the same thing that, had the volunteers listed in Super and had an email for them. They were trying to log on. There was a disconnect there. It was because the email password or the emails were different. Everyone must have a unique email to work in this. They have to be logged into Super first. Once they're logged into Super, then that person can log in, provided that email is the same that they've got in Super. One other thing that I would mention, or two things, Natalie, I'll ask you to address here in a minute. So what is the volunteer admin? You talked a little bit about that. You mentioned that 3 or 4 times to let organizations know what you're talking about there. The other thing is, if you have a very, very, very efficient volunteer administrator, Aaron Fletcher, online here, actually a lot of times we'll get information into the system faster than the system can update it. And so there is a little bit of lag time there when you put information into the system. That system isn't updated to the server instantly. And so sometimes there is a little bit of lag time. Don't panic if you put something in there and it doesn't instantaneously show up in your recorded data.
I got two more things to tag on to what Greg said too about the email. I had one individual that did not have an email. It's as simple as them creating them a Gmail account, even if they're not going to use that, and you have a volunteer entering those hours. But everybody has to have an email. So even for those that don't have an email, that needs to be created. So you're going to have to get a volunteer to work with that. The other thing is going back to the agent's responsibility. Before you let them loose into the new database, the agent's got to have all those projects to input. So I would suggest doing that, you know, making sure that your emails are correct in Super, and then making sure your new project list is in there as well before you let them loose to start reporting.
I have one thing to add to that. We had the problem we had, folks would sign in and register with their existing email in Super, and then they go and they try to change their email once they were in there, and it created two separate people, and it did it on 3 or 4 volunteers. So make sure they know you have to stick with that email unless they tell you in advance.
Right. Your email is your username. And so, and to really follow up on what Amy said, it's important to get what we want to use in the system when we begin, instead of getting in the system and then trying to adjust. And so now that I've had a chance to sit back and read some of the questions, I'll be able to kind of follow up on some of the things that we have in the chat box. What Amy and Rachel Etherly have been talking about is the fact that, and I'll bring this up with Brad, maybe to have the capacity in the future to have a project-specific report that we can pull. I think that would be something we can work on in the future. So that's a good thing to bring up with IT. From Manny, who was asking about folks who don't have an email address, pretty much we need to make them an email address. It's maybe not the simplest answer to the question, but pretty much the place where we're in with our technology and our system is that folks need to have an email address. And maybe some of the most common questions that we've gotten are, what about husband-wife couples who have the same email address? Well, we kind of just need to get the other spouse an email address, and they can still maintain all of their communication with their primary address. That's not a problem. But that new address will be the way that they can reset their password. So it's just kind of the answer. Everybody needs to have their own email address. Tina Smock from Warren County had a great question, and that is, what about this syncing of email addresses between the old database and between the Super? And so I am going to log in as myself and show you how, okay, you can see that I've got multiple screens. I'm having a little bit of Zoom screen sharing challenge. Okay, here we go. I'm going to log in as myself, and I'm going to show you how to update email addresses. So this will be a feature that is available to volunteer managers and to agents. And as soon as I get this done, Greg, then I'm going to talk about that volunteer manager role and try to clarify a little bit of the differences there. So the opportunity to sync the old database with the new database will be a great way to simplify the process of getting everybody's email addresses correct. So we talked about the fact that we want Super to match the old database, and so the logical question is, okay, you know, which one's primary? Who's the trump card? And so my answer to that would be, if I were doing this from scratch, I would get everybody's email updated in Super, and then I would print out that list. And then you can come in into this admin update volunteer function, and I'm gonna use Cumberland County as an example here, and you will be able to then just double check and make sure that the old email addresses match the new ones. So right here, for instance, We have the opportunity to make sure that Wilma's email address in the old database matches super. So this save and sync button right here will update the old database. So if you update super, print out that list, and then come in here and check, folks, you can, from one screen, without logging in and logging out as a whole bunch of volunteers in the old database, you can update all of their email addresses. And this was actually very accidentally a very useful example, because I actually know this email address right here, and it belongs to another volunteer who probably managed the old database and used her address for a volunteer who didn't have their own. And so this is a perfect example of the situation where this would be an email address that would need to be updated. All you'd have to do is type in the new address that is unique for Wilma, save and sync, and the old database is updated from right here. And so that gives you the opportunity to update super, then come into the new database, make sure that it matches, and you are all set. So, Tina, did that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to take that as a yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, right. I'll open up the chat box. Okay. Yeah. Tina says yes. And one other quick question from Rachel about interns. If interns are not in the old database, then this, especially as archive for participants, all of that is simpler, right? All you need to do is make sure that their email address is in super, and they will be able to register into the new database. So in fact, interns are actually simpler. Okay, so I'm going to get back to the question that Greg wanted me to address, and that's to explain a little bit about what this volunteer manager role does. And so I'm logged in as myself, but this is very similar to what the volunteer manager will see, and what that is a new role for this database, and it allows the agent to kind of designate a volunteer manager. Many of you already have them. You know, I can think of Cumberland County, Wilson County, Shelby County, definitely. You have volunteers who manage a lot of hours, and this gives them the opportunity to do it easier. And so when they log into the project screen with their new role as volunteer manager, instead of seeing the log project hours button, the ability to edit their own report, or the ability to delete their own report, they have this additional button, which not very surprisingly is named admin reporting. And so when they hit this, instead of just getting the list of projects, which is what you see for yourself if you hit log project hours, see the log project hours, you just get the opportunity to select the project. But if you hit admin reporting, you get the opportunity to select the volunteer and
approve.
So
projects, so that it can be entered on the main thing, so that it can be counted as hours.
So you will have the opportunity to simply select the person that you would like to report for, and then you will be able to go in and select the project that you are inputting hours for that specific volunteer. So right now I am logged in as an administrator in Greene County, so we're seeing some of their projects. So if we wanted to input hours for this project for this person, we simply select them, hit that button, and this looks exactly like you would do it for yourself, only you're able to fulfill that role as an admin and input hours for other people. It's exactly the same thing on the CEU. Ignore this bottom section that has category management right here. The volunteer managers would have these 4 buttons: CEU hours, edit, delete, just like every volunteer has, but then they will also have this admin log CEU hours, which is exactly the same thing. You would be able to select a volunteer within your group, only your group. You cannot log hours for people all over the state. and then you
Who
would
are your officers?
and you would add in the same information that you add for yourself. And so that's the one of the most.
Who are the other people? Ava? Pat? Or is it Deb?
I'm going to
Is Deb on it?
mute all. Okay. So those are some of the key features of the volunteer manager. Another important feature that as a volunteer manager you'll be able to do will be that manage archive volunteers. So for the agents who are on the call, if that whole spiel about making sure that email addresses matched sounded rather overwhelming, that is something that you can coordinate with some of the volunteers in your group. I'm looking at Chris Ramsey right here. Jerry Ramey did a lot of background work to make sure that email addresses match. So we definitely have some very experienced volunteers who have done a lot of work with managing their participants to get folks moved in. Okay, Greg, did that adequately answer your question?
Well, I think you've got some good questions there. A couple of people asked, can we have multiple volunteer admin people?
Okay. Right here, oh yeah, that's from Marcia in Knox County. You can have multiple volunteer managers. You could, that's simply just a role management issue that I can go in there and change. So there's no problem with adding several folks if that's the way that works best for your group. And it's also something that is very simple to change. So, 2 years from now, if someone no longer needs or wants that access, we can make them a regular volunteer again. So, if you have new membership coordinators, it's something that we can switch back. That's no problem. Let's see. There was a question, is there a specific form that the volunteer manager uses to input the data? And hopefully those screens that I just showed kind of address that. But essentially as a volunteer manager, you will be entering just like individuals do. You'll just have the opportunity to select people instead of just selecting projects. So you can input for others. I believe this next question is, can we see the names of the Master Gardeners working on each project and the relative hours they're putting in on a given date? I think that might fall a little bit more towards our earlier conversation about, are we sorting by project or are we sorting by people at an administrative level? And I think right now the answer is it's much easier to look up the people and see what they're reporting to than it is to look up the project and find the associated people. And so I think that's a conversation I can have with IT, and maybe that's something we can address some in the future. One of the questions is, can volunteer managers start to add new projects and things like that to get counties in a position to switch if their agent doesn't have enough time or if they happen to be between agents? And that is an option. It's something that as a group you can decide if you want to wait a little bit until that spot gets filled, or if you want to begin switching now, that's certainly something that I can work with you guys on. So that is an opportunity.
Natalie, I wanted to throw out there too, think of, for all the counties, when you're putting that project list together, as simplified accounting. We don't need, the fact that if you have one major project, say it's a garden show, not breaking every little detail of that garden show down into a project. It needs to be one big project that you report to. And so ultimately, as we pull these numbers together and use this to kind of identify volunteers, we don't need to identify every teeny tiny little intricacy. It's better if they're looped or lumped and kind of categorized together in larger, big file folders. So if you wanted to think of it like that, you know, just a folder that you put all those hours into rather than multiple folders.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think I've kind of been focusing a little bit on the details, but that was a great thing for Greg to step back and talk about the big picture, because hopefully what this new database allows us to do is do a better job of organizing our projects and our work in a logical manner. And so being able to take a breath and sit back and say, instead of reporting in 77 different categories, let's report in 12. And when we go back to our county director or go to the county commissioner, we can really be able to show them the big areas that were impacting the county, and hopefully also simplify reporting.
Yeah, and actually, as extension agents, and as Dr. Baumgartner says, we will report to statewide action agendas. Because even though you may take some of these and have them in a a fewer number of folders, they'll probably even be condensed even more so down into certain action agendas statewide for our educational efforts.
I'm going to pull up a county report just so you get a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about in terms of categories and the simplification of showing what you've been doing as a group. So once again, I'm gonna pull up Greene County because I know that they have been an early adopter, and so they have hours reported for this year. And so what you're looking at is the summary of 2018. And so you can look at it in a tabular view. You can see they've been doing a lot of plant sale work. Or you can look at it in a chart view. And this gets back to exactly what Greg was getting at. And it's the opportunity to really be clear about the time that we're spending and how we're impacting our community. So each project that your agent or your volunteer manager makes new and enters in our new volunteer system will be grouped in one of these big bins, right? Say large categories: community outreach, landscape management, ornamentals, community food production, fruits and vegetables, administrative and organizational support, or youth horticulture. So 5 big categories. And you as a volunteer won't have to select these. When you report to the project, just like you do now, it'll automatically be put in these categories. But you'll be able, at any given time in the year or at the end of the year, to pull up the report from your county and say, wow, we've already invested over 600 hours. We've driven thousands of miles. Look at the value that we're already in only this 4 months contributing to our county. And we're doing it a lot in community outreach, but we're also spending a lot of time with kids. We do need to manage our organization, but we also spend time in food. And so when you talk to your county leaders, when you talk to your county administrators, you'll have the opportunity to say, here's really what we're doing. They don't understand necessarily what all the names of your projects mean. But when you say we spent 400 hours last year in community outreach, that begins to hit home. And so this little graph that I pulled up right here, every volunteer will be able to pull up for their county at any given time.
Yep. Natalie, we've not done this, but we've allowed all the counties to have the freedom to kind of categorize all those how they want. Knox County, again, I think asked the question, will these kind of start to mirror what the Search for Excellence awards are? And there might be some thought to, kind of not necessarily dictating, but giving people those major topic areas that if you want it or you don't know what you want to lump them in, here's a suggestion. Those that Melody had there were awful good suggestions if you want a generalized category to kind of put things into. Big folders to to put your activities in.
Yeah. One of the questions that just came up in the chat box is from Knox County, and the question is, we have a lot of different community gardens that we work in. Should we have individual projects, or should we have a large project that is community gardens? And so that is an excellent question for which nobody but you and your county will be able to know the best answer to. And I think that it's a great question that illustrates the beneficial conversations that needs to take place as you move to this system, because as a group, you can decide, well, actually, we'd really kind of like to know specifically the hours for Concord and specifically the hours for All Saints. So I think we need separate projects. Different counties may come to a different conclusion on that. And so, so really you have the opportunity to make those decisions specific for the projects, but know that those community food gardens will still be reporting to community food production. And so in that pie chart, they'll be together, and you can decide whether you want them separate or all lumped when you make your projects to report to. So that's a great question. So those are most of the kind of big picture topics that I wanted to make sure that we covered. I know we've got several agents on the call, from Chris to Rachel, who have already been moving folks in their group. So I don't want to shortcut anybody who also has experience in this system, and definitely we're open to questions from counties who are thinking about when and how.
Natalie, I'll just say something real quick.
Yeah.
So for mine, I think it worked very well for me to go through and check those emails first, like Melody and Greg have already talked about, and kind of check over, make sure those emails match, and then make sure that those people that are registering know what that email was, because they might have forgotten that too already. So have those kind of printed out or email those to them so that they know what email you have on file. And like Amy said, make sure that's the one that they even want to use. And then I have slowly actually moved over my board and growth team. So if you have a group of volunteers that you know are going to try to work on something faster than the entire group, and it's kind of a way for you to see how this is going to go. So kind of move over your board first, or any other kind of little smaller group that you have that you can work with, and just have a meeting with them. And I train them individually. So I had a meeting with the board and train them on how to enter into the system and get in at least. Even if they don't start entering hours, they're just in there at least. And then the growth team, I had a meeting with them and showed them how to use it and made sure they knew how to get in. So that way, I think whenever we do move over the entire group in June, we even have some others that already know how to work it and already know what they're doing before we have the entire group try to move over. So I think maybe that'll help. And that way you're not overwhelmed as an agent, I think, with people not knowing how to use the system. You only have, 15 people asking you, I don't know what I'm doing, instead of having 100 at one time trying to push them in. So I think that was very wise. I don't remember who told me to do that, but it was a great idea. So definitely do that. Find a smaller group, get them in, get them working in it and trying to enter before you try to push everybody in at one time.
Yeah, that's really a great point. And it accomplishes multiple things. You get buy-in from your leaders.
Yes.
And then you have, it's kind of a train the trainer system. I can brag on one of Amy's volunteers. Linda has been running point for a lot of their people who are moving over. And so she solves a lot of the problems. And if they're a little bit too confusing for her, then she'll bounce them to Amy, or Amy will bounce them to me. And so we have different stages of people who are helping folks move over. And it has been, it's been great.
Natalie, I'd like to hear from some of anyone actually, kind of the timeline for when they decided to swap. Like, for instance, our, my reporting, I had let everyone report until December 31st, and then it starts over. So would it be better to wait until then, or go ahead, I mean, start in the middle of the year, or like, I just don't know. What did everybody else do?
I'm giving mine until July 1st. And then I'm telling them that the website goes away, and I will not be checking double websites in order to check for certification.
But when did you start? In January?
No, when Natalie came I think that was the March meeting.
The second week in March.
Yeah. We had, we introduced it to the association. Now I'm gonna go ahead and tell y'all, of the 200 and something people that are in my association, only 43 have gotten on here, and we've been running it for 2 months. But in May, our next meeting, we are actually going to do it again and let them know that this is the progress we've made. But I did go ahead, and on my intern class, I didn't even start them on the old website. We started fresh and new, and everybody in the class is on the site. We even had Linda brought her computer and her husband Dave, and we got people email addresses as well.
That's what I'm wondering. That's what I'm wondering. Like, maybe if at our regular monthly meetings, like, we have really high attendance compared to what our overall total of, you know, people in the group are. So what if I had like 4 or 5 computer stations set up with people who knew how to do it? Like Rachel said, if you've already trained the board, and just say, this is what we're doing this month. You know?
That is actually what we are doing for our May meeting. We have no speaker. We're going to have a parade of projects, you know, and give some updates about that. But the second half is you're going to go to whoever's around the room, and you guys need to go ahead and register, write down your password, what you're doing, and moving forward, and then go play on the site. I tried to tell them that as well. You cannot hurt anything. You know, you're not going to call unless you try to go in and put in multiple email addresses that don't match the
Unless
system.
you register yourself 3 times, there's no way you can mess up.
That can be a problem. But
I think all that sounds like a really good idea. And so now I'm leaning towards waiting until next January, because we have our programs planned for the rest of the year. And that way it's just kind of starting everything fresh and new, you know. Finish out this year on the old one, and then we'll let y'all all figure out all the problems, and then you can tell us what they are. And we'll do.
And I think that's great. Great advice, not the problem part. But I mean, from my perspective, I don't want all my counties switching at the same time. And from your perspective, you don't want 150 people switching at one time. And so if you can switch a few people every month over the course of 3 or 4 months for your larger groups, I can brag on Sequatchie Bledsoe County a little bit. You know, they're a small group. I was there on Saturday morning. Sheldon just went into Super, printed out what everybody's email address was, handed it out to everybody, you know. And for smaller groups, it can be a one-time, we're all sitting in the same place, let's do it. But for larger groups, you'll want to stagger the people in your own group, because that way your early adopters get to learn the ropes. Your more technology savvy people are going to be first, and they can help your later adopters. And so you kind of build that technical support into your own group.
Is the data from the old database going to be ported to the new one?
Yes. So the data from the old database will come in. Obviously, those 5 project categories that we talked about didn't exist in the old database, and so it will come in as one group, and it will be called archived data. In fact, I can show you. You know, this category right here would be data that was put into the old website in 2018, and then when it was brought in, it was just called archive data. But when you go back up to that table view, it'll have it just like you entered it in, with the project name and all of those sorts of things. Now there is a little bit of coding that comes into play to bring the old data in. So when people initially register, they may, you know, they'll be accepted, they'll update their profile, but they may not have all of this year's data that they entered in the old database. Give it a week or 2. It's a little bit of a manual process. We have to run that code to bring the old data in. So give it a week or 2, but they should be able to soon have all of their 2018 data brought into the new database. And one of the questions is, can people still use the old database until they start the new database? Yes. Certainly that is a conversation that I will have with IT at some point in the future. We will need to discontinue using the old database, but that is not a conversation that has taken place yet, because we just want to, we want people to move in as low stress an environment as possible. One of the questions is, can you start using the new database now? You can if your county projects are in there, or if you are a local volunteer leader and you'd like to register and just get familiar with the system before your county starts to move over, that's an option as well. Okay, we are actually we're actually on time. We are doing so well this morning. We have about 5 more minutes. This is a question from Matt in Bradley County, and his question is, are there training materials available? And so I have 2 answers to that. One is, of course, that we are recording this meeting right now, and so folks will be able to go back and hear some of the questions and the discussions and the overview. So there will be this training video, but I also have a PowerPoint that walks people through the registration process that's really made for volunteers. We also have a more comprehensive file that is developed for agents. So, so we do have training files, and when I get off this call, I'll work on getting all the video in place, and then I will send out those resources to our agents and our officers. Tom's ready to go enjoy this beautiful day. If we don't have any more questions, I just want to thank everybody for joining in. I know that technology is sometimes not all of our favorite topics, but I'm excited about the ability that this new tool is going to give us to do an even better job of representing to our counties what amazing impacts we have throughout the state. I'll also give you a promo for June 1st, which is a Friday at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 10 o'clock Central. We'll be having another one of these visits, and we're not going to talk about technology. We're going to talk about service. We're going to talk about youth. We're going to talk about community gardens. We're going to talk about the great projects that are occurring all over the state, and I would invite all of you to join in for that visit as well. Any last minute questions? Of course, if this is just brought up questions in your county and you want to talk to me or some of the other agents who are early adopters individually, we're absolutely open to that. But once again, thanks for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you guys at plant sales and garden shows and all sorts of good events throughout the summer.
Good week.
See you later.